Welcome to 101.1 FM WBRULP WFOOLP WVVXLP Providence. My name is Dhruv.
And I'm Alejandro.
And this is the Outta Pocket Podcast,
where we pull conversation topics out of our pocket.
And occasionally go out of pocket.
So on today's show, we're going to talk about the idea of uniqueness of perspective. Essentially how different individuals see the world in different ways. I want to introduce two examples to sort of elaborate on this point. So I guess if you guys didn't know, a lot of our conversation topics stem from conversations that we have, outside of the podcast, and we basically save them for later. Put them in the vault.
We put them in the vault, and we're like, all right, let's elaborate on that later.
So I guess this is one of the conversation topics that we've had, just in conversation, and I guess this came about really with first the idea of CS, right? So I've taken a couple of computer science courses in my between high school and being here at Brown. I know I don't know how extensive your experience in CS is.
Absolutely zero. Okay. I do not like CS. I do not plan on ever taking a CS class, but at the same time, I recognize its value and its importance, and I probably have to get some exposure at some point.
Who cares?
For real, bro.
No, obviously,
chemistry and bio is where it's at.
Yeah, chemistry, cracked, bio.
Hey, don't be dissing on bio.
No. Prior to this semester, I would have been fully dissing on bio. Professor Miller has showed me the ways. Goated. But anyways, I'm sorry, we digress. But so with computer science, essentially, we got into the topic of conversation of how different individuals approach computer science problems in different ways. In computer science, a lot of times, you can have, a problem, whether it be iterate through a list and remove all the words a list of words and remove all the words that have the letter A, or iterate through a list of numbers and sum up all the numbers in the list, right? And a lot of times in computer science there are a multitude of ways to accomplish these tasks. Obviously, usually in computer science, you want to use the most efficient way. You can measure efficiency in different ways, whether it be the solution that takes the least amount of time or the solution that takes the least amount of memory on your computer. But all of that is sort of tangential to the point of the conversation. Essentially, the main point of the conversation is that I may approach a computer science problem completely differently from how somebody else would. And then the conversation sort of grew into how people's unique perspectives shape the way they see the world, the way they approach issues, and how they find solutions to the problems they face. Another sort of example, so I mentioned I wanted to include two examples of how to elaborate on uniqueness of perspective. And the other example I wanted to talk about was an anecdote in regards to a class I took last semester here at Brown, which was my engineering course, Engineering 32. So here at Brown we have Engineering 30, which is sort of the more traditional engineering course. It deals with statics, more so prepping you for that typical engineering, or I guess how people would envision the typical engineering track to be. I took Engineering 32, which is engineering and design, and I guess that course fit better for me because in future I wanted to design prosthetics, so sort of the whole design aspect of the course felt very, beneficial to where I wanted to end up in life, and sort of, I don't know, it just seemed like it fit really well. And so in Engineering 32, we have, these projects where not only do you have to engineer, the whatever we're building. So I guess our final project was a prosthesis that would allow a parent with an amputation to hold their newborn baby. And so I guess a lot of times when we think of engineering and design, we kind of think of them as the same entity, But if there's anything I've learned from taking this class last semester, it's that engineering and design are two very different things, and I suck at design. I am so bad at design. Between engineering and design, engineering is so much like very much so I guess logic based. Like you sort of think of like what's the most logical solution. So like for example, when we were designing this prosthetic, and I'll get into how this sort of gets into uniqueness of perspective. I am a very sort of like
logic first.
Yeah, logic first, and so like immediately like the first thing I thought of when like coming up with ideas for this prosthetic was basically a prosthesis that looked like a normal human arm, that functioned and looked like a normal human arm. But if there's one thing that I've learned from taking Engineering 32, and that's where I'm going with this, is that there are multiple ways to sort of envision what such a prosthesis could look like. And so like the final design that we ended up going with was essentially like it looked like a basket that you would attach to like the amputation site in order to be able to hold your newborn baby. And so like that was an idea that I never could have come up with on my own if it weren't for the help of the other members of my team. And if there's one thing I really learned from taking the course, it's that people's perspectives and like the way they envision approaching different problems is like widely different based on the way they perceive the world and like the way their brain I guess sort of functions, where their strengths lie, if they think more logically or more creatively, et cetera, et cetera. So those are two examples that I wanted to include to sort of elaborate on this point. I hope that sort of made more sense as to what we're talking about in terms of uniqueness of perspective. But I want to ask you, have you like experienced any like I guess aspects of your life, or like have any stories where you've been working with other people and like you've seen sort of this uniqueness of perspective?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think right off the bat it's just foolish to say that everyone thinks the same.
Yeah,
because that's cap. But let's see. I guess nothing like immediately comes to mind. For example, it's in my life. But I mean, it pretty much like it. You see it every day. Where are we going to lunch? Someone's like, oh, I prefer the ratty. Think they're serving some good food. Or someone's like, oh, like let's wait 45 minutes in line for an Andrew's burrito on a Sunday morning.
Hey, yo, those are good, bro.
Hey, bro, I don't know about that.
Hey,
I don't know about that one.
No, those are good. Because like, okay, here's the thing. They're not. It depends on how we define good, right? Because at least for me, like, it's like, okay, there are certain foods that may not be like bussin', like they may not be like that amazing,
but they're subsistence.
But not only that, but they have such a distinctive taste that like I remember I was like over break, I was in the shower and I was like, damn, bro, I would kill for an Andrew's burrito right now. Like I could like taste it.
Bro, you were down bad.
Bro, those things like.
Nah, man.
There are some things that like Joe's spicy chicken sandwiches.
Sheesh.
Like, bro, there's something about it, like eating one late at night, that like
the vibe.
It just stays with you. So like waking up after when like on a weekend morning when you just wake up like groggy, like late.
Yeah.
So you're just like damn, like, and you're thinking of all the work you have to do today. And then like you sort of start procrastinating with like all the things that you have to. You're like, oh well, like I gotta shower, so you go shower, and then like you're like, oh, like I gotta get breakfast, and then so you go get breakfast, and it's an Andrew's burrito, and like there's just something about like
it gives you the energy.
It's something about the vibe. It's something. No, that shit knocks you out, bro. Like I'll eat one and then be like, damn, I'm stuffed. I have no idea. Like I have no motivation to do what I gotta do for the day. I have the itis. It's over. It's a wrap. Clock out. Take a nap. Wake up. All right. Like now I'll kind of half work, but anyways, that's. We keep digressing, but I guess that's what makes the podcast Out of Pocket.
We out of pocket with this one. Maybe I'm out of pocket in saying Andrew's burrito. It's aight. Like okay, yeah, it's not bad.
It's aight. It's not bad.
Is it worth waiting 45 minutes, bro?
I would wait 45 minutes for that.
I don't know about that one, Chief. I would be high key. I was fiending for a Vita bagel. I don't know what it is about those things, but Vita bagels, high key, supreme.
Well, this may be out of pocket, but I don't like bagels.
Bruh.
Hey, bagels are mid, man. Like it's a texture
cap.
thing, and like the fact that I don't like a hole in my bread.
That's cap.
Nah, there's something about the idea of having a hole in my bread that I'm just not a fan of. Like,
Okay, what about donuts then?
bro, I only eat donuts with no hole in them, or like the hole is so like you know those like powdered sugar donuts that are like so like small. Yeah, that's me. And plus, like the idea of a hole in like anything you eat is so annoying because then you take the first bite, and then which way do you go? You go left or right, bro. Like I don't want to choose. Like if I'm eating something, I don't want to have to choose. Like why do I gotta pick? What am I, Robert Frost? Like get out of here with that. And I don't got time, man.
God. I think we're getting severely off topic here. The point I was trying to make, actually, I think this very much illustrates the point I was trying to make. Even with like the most basic of things, we all have our own experiences that we bring to the table, and our own opinions on things, and that leads us to have different perspectives on things as simple as the Andrew's burrito or the Vita bagel.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, not to state the obvious, but different perspectives are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just an unavoidable fact of life that as a result of primarily upbringing, but also environmental factors,
for sure.
Just literally nature and nurture.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone brings something unique to the table.
Yeah, for sure. I find it really interesting how like nature and nurture. I mean, it goes without saying. I feel like it's such but nature and nurture really play like a very strong role in sort of
Development.
Yeah, and how people see the world, and like at least for me, like I was saying earlier, I'm not a very artistic person, like at all. Like I can like sketch kind of, but like for example, like one of our other engineering 32 projects was like we had to design like a chair for a teacher, and like I had to like make a bunch of sketches for the chair. I can't say that it didn't take me hours to come up with like designs, and it wasn't even. And I think one is like we were talking about earlier, I'm a very like logic based person, so I keep like constraining myself to like the same sort of general designs in terms of like look, function, aesthetics, right? But also like in terms of artistic ability, like I would spend like hours like drawing and erasing the same line because I just was like, damn, I can't get it right. And also like part of it is me being very nitpicky about how my final products look, but like also just like I'm not cracked at art like somebody who can just like draw a perfect circle in one flick of the wrist, or you with your little dotted lines on a chalkboard that you're like,
bruh. I don't know if that's art. I think that's just like a random practice that I picked up.
But yeah, so point being that like it's just crazy how like people basically like, I feel like part of the difference in uniqueness of perspective is, as we were saying, like difference in strengths and how one's strengths play to their perspective and how they see the world and how they engage with things around them. So you brought up something earlier that I was actually wanted to talk about in the episode, which you were talking about how people's upbringings and their genetics affect, I guess, how they interact with the world around them. Yeah, nature versus nurture, how they interact with the world around them, their uniqueness of perspective. And one of the, I guess, interesting things I wanted to talk about was epigenetics. So, here, I did a little sort of research before the episode, and this article by the CDC here talks about epigenetics. So I guess first, let's define epigenetics.
Yep.
So according to the CDC, epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. Unlike genetic changes, epigenetic changes are reversible and do not change your DNA sequence, but they change how your body reads a DNA sequence.
Yeah, like methylation,
Yeah.
adenylation, etc. Acetylation. Rather.
Yeah. So epigenetic changes affect gene expression to turn genes quote unquote off and quote unquote on. Since your environment and behaviors such as diet and exercise can result in epigenetic changes, it is easy to see the connection between your genes and your behaviors and environment. And how can epigenetics change, or how can your epigenetics change? So changes begin before you're born. All cells have the same genes but look and act differently, and as you grow and develop, epigenetics to help determine which function a cell will have.
Dang, bro, you hitting them with the Bio 500 lecture right now. I swear I was literally just reading about this stuff.
Damn, for real, that's crazy. I'm not there yet, but hey, and your epigenetics change through your life. And as I mentioned earlier, according to this article, not all epigenetic changes are permanent. Some epigenetic changes can be added or removed in response to changes in behavior or environment, and they can affect your health in different ways. So, infections, you may be more or less prone to getting sick, more or less prone to developing cancer mutations, and nutrition during pregnancy is a very important aspect. So these are all aspects that are covered in this article. And I just wanted to mention, if you all are interested in looking into this article, it's titled "What is Epigenetics?" At cdc.gov. So yeah, that's sort of the source in case you guys want to read this article for yourself and give it a more thorough looking through.
Right. Kind of unrelated tangent before you go on. I remember reading a long time ago. I used to read the popular science magazine, the good old Pop Sci, and like years ago, like when I was in middle school, I remember reading this article, and it was basically like it was crazy. It was like these geneticists were looking through the genes of like some truly terrible, violent people, like Ted Bundy and Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, and they were finding like this like remarkably similar like genetic mutation. They're like, oh, is this like the anger gene? Like question mark, like and that's just that introduced, like, back in the day, I was just thinking about these sort of things, like, wow, it's not necessarily, it's always a two-way street. I remember in psych last year I learned about something called the biopsychosocial model, where it's like society and your internal psychology and your biology, basically nature and nurture and all that stuff, all influence each other back and forth, and it's really impossible to separate the influence of one from another. And that's kind of where I fall on the nature versus nurture debate. And I think where most people fall in this conclusion is, yes, both are important. It's not one or the other. It's definitely both, and they influence each other. So when you were saying epigenetics, like your environment can, during periods of stress, maybe certain genes are methylated or acetylated or whatever. But like it could also go the other way, some gene or genetic mutation that you acquired, either through like pure chance, when your gametes were coming together, can influence your outward behavior. And and also this sort of ties into discussions of mental health and whatnot, because just basic brain chemistry, like certain receptors are affected and could lead to disorders like depression or schizophrenia. And so I I don't necessarily know what this has to do with differences in perspective. So
Okay, yeah. So I guess really quick before I get into that, um, I just wanted to talk about because you brought up a very interesting point about sort of what genes you inherit, and when you're talking about the study of the genes of these sort of
mm-hmm.
mass murderers, that how they found basically the similarities they found between them. I read this really interesting book 2 years ago, or like our junior year. It's called Living with Our Genes by Dean Hammer and Peter Copeland. And essentially it basically talks about specific genes that are found within humans that sort of control these traits. Reading this book personally, I guess, told me a lot about myself, because it covered like some really big points. Like, for example, one of them was like risk taking. I am not a big risk taker. Like I feel like I've changed.
You think so? Given our behavior in the blizzard last week.
It's changed more recently than it had. But if you like in high school, I was definitely like people knew like. I feel like a lot of people would know me as somebody who was very like.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm not doing that. And so like this one of the aspects that this book talks about is like, how certain genes, whether they're more expressed or less expressed, determine how much of a risk taker you are, or like how you react in situations where you're angered, how addiction affects you, like one of the other things was like worry, like anxiety. So that book was very interesting in sort of seeing how all these genes come through and express these sort of different things, and how ultimately everybody reacts. So everybody experiences these emotions differently, or sort of these behaviors differently because of their genes. But I guess back on track with sort of uniqueness or perspective. I guess one of the connections I made is like, in terms of uniqueness or perspective, I feel like epigenetics plays a big role, because as we were saying, like, depending on your upbringing. So for example, if you grew up in poverty, and you were you and your family were constantly you're figuring out how like you're gonna put food on the table, right? These are factors that can basically change your genes, basically, and sort of how your body reads genes, as we talked about in that CDC article. And I feel like those changes sort of affect, I guess, how you end up later in life. So for example, like if you're constantly from a young age, like I guess living that sort of I don't want to call it like
a stressful environment.
Yeah, but like I feel like later in life, like even if you let's say transition into a basically, like if you make the transition from low class to middle class, or right, I feel like the way you perceive the world is still sort of like, you still perceive things, like you're still very, what's the word I'm looking for, like you sort of hold on to things as if like they're scarce, right? Like you sort of don't lose the mindset that you develop when you were living in such a stressful situation. I feel like as I was saying with epigenetics and how these factors change the way your body reads these genes, these like changes, although they can be reversed, as the article said, I feel like they do last like a while. And I mean,
it's because they're traumatic.
Yeah. But I feel like that plays a big role in how people perceive things, and how not only do people perceive things differently because their brains are wired differently from the get-go, like because obviously everybody's genes are unique from one another. Not only is it a matter of like, oh, my genetic code is different from yours, it's also how I grew up versus like how you grew up. Like these things obviously matter, and how they play, a role in uniqueness of perspective. So I feel like that's how I wanted to tie epigenetics, or that's how I, sort of in my head saw epigenetics tying into this whole thing. I don't know if you agree with that or.
No, I think you're making a valid point here.
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, I don't know if this is basically just like a hypothesis of mine or sort of.
I mean, it's also like we're kind of just two dudes talking. We're not scientific experts here.
Yeah, not at all.
So, I mean, to me at least, that connection is sound.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of, I know we talk about this a lot, but this kind of brings us into, like, I think people are just wired differently. Quite literally built different. But I mean, I know for sure that I love chem, and like I don't want to sound pretentious or like braggadocious, but like frankly, I think I'm pretty good at chem. Like a lot of the concepts inherently make sense to me, whereas I know for a fact that just a lot of my friends over the years are just like, I have no idea what's happening in that class. Whereas, I could be sitting like absolutely like dumbfounded at you explaining like lines of code. Maybe that's just because I haven't learned CS, but to me it still seems just like absolutely like it makes no sense. And like once again, maybe I just haven't applied myself or tried learning it, but I feel like at some fundamental level I'm wired a certain way to like, I am inherently understanding of the concepts of, chem and bio, and that makes me good at them, and frankly that's also part of why I like those subjects. Whereas for stuff like, like physics or mechanics, it's like like, but
so I guess interesting. So then the next thing where I wanted to go with this was like how sort of, how you age and as you, progress through life, you gain new wisdoms, you gain new insights, right? These things also affect your perspective on life. So I guess brief recap, because, we've been a little all over the place. I'm not going to lie. Sorry about that, guys. But I guess first, just to sort of recap the aspects of, I guess, life that I think define uniqueness of perspective. So one, genetics from birth, like your genetic code obviously affects the way you interact with things in the world around you. Aside from that, as I talked about epigenetics, how, things throughout your life affect how your body reads those genetics, and then I feel like that can also change the way that you perceive the world and how your uniqueness of perspective is sort of altered. And the last thing is, I guess, just the pure wisdom and insight that you gain over the course of your life. Like, as you get older, you learn new things, you experience these new things, you gain new knowledge, you can apply these experiences and this knowledge to sort of I guess see the world in a different way. I mean, essentially that's how it works. And so like you were talking about, CS or like physics, and personally I've learned that like there are a lot of times where like early on in my life I will approach a topic such as like algebra 2. I know algebra in general was always like my first time learning it was always like rough, and then like revisiting it later in life always like made things more clear to me, and I was able to like get it more easily. Another example is biology, as I talked about earlier. Like prior to this semester of college, I was never a big bio fan, and I think like part of it is, I guess, I feel like in freshman year of high school, I mean, it wasn't sort of expressed to me in the best of ways that I could understand. I could sort of I mean, that boils down to more quality of like teacher and whatever, but that's a whole different tangent. But also just like, you know, after 4 years of high school, I'm taking bio again in freshman year of college, and with all the knowledge that I've gained over 4 years, it definitely changes the way I perceive biology and the subjects that I'm learning, and how I make it make sense in my head. So, you know, for example, having taken AP Chem, now sort of the more, I guess, you know, cell aspects like ATP and ADP and all that stuff makes more sense to me now because I sort of understand chemistry better, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I guess that's the last aspect that I wanted to cover in terms of like how, you know, experience affects uniqueness of perspective.
Yeah, so, I mean, you made like some interesting points about, you know, how growing older, you know, gathering experiences, sort of changes your perspective. One thing that I particularly noticed as I grew up, I sort of started viewing my life as like a machine learning algorithm.
Says the guy who doesn't like CS, huh?
In concept, sometimes it's very cool, but you know, it's basically like, okay, this didn't work, next, this didn't work, next, this didn't work, next, until I finally build up like an ideal algorithm that works.
Yeah,
and I mean, that's what most people would call making mistakes and learning from them.
Yeah,
like,
I feel like everybody, like, you know, as we were talking about, like, you figure out what works for you, basically. Like we were saying, everybody's brain's wired differently. Everybody has like a unique perspective on things, and they have like a sort of, I guess, formula that works best for them. So I mean, yeah, I guess that algorithm that you're talking about is how you.
I'm not spitting any rocket science here. I'm just saying, like, you know, I found something that works for me. You know, sometimes I make mistakes. I'm like, okay, what didn't work? What can I fix? What was out of my control? And then I move from there. You know, you were saying earlier about taking risks and whatnot. I don't know. I'd like to say that I take risks. I mean, maybe I do to some extent, but they're also very calculated.
Yeah, okay. So I feel like that's a very important distinction that people don't. Like, it's one thing to take a risk, and there's one thing to take a calculated risk. I feel like a risk is like jumping out of a plane with no parachute. I mean, it's a risk, but I can't exactly say it's a very calculated one, as opposed to, you know, like, okay, like, let's say I'm taking this class and like this teacher has given us 3 homework drops, right? And I have an assignment due for another class that's due like tonight at like 11:59, right? But I also have an assignment for the class in which I have 3 homework jobs due at 11:59. I feel like a calculated risk would be to, you know, not do the homework for the class I have 3 homework jobs in, and instead focus on the homework for the other class. Like, it's a risk, yeah, because, you know, let's say later on down the line, you miss 3 other homeworks in that class, and like, so like you miss 4 homeworks, and now like you're taking a hit to your grade. But at the same time, before you calculated, and you were like, okay, you weighed the options, right?
Yeah, so I feel for me that's like very like economical, you know, like marginal utility and all that stuff. Like, okay, rolling up to final season, just because of all the various padding and whatever on my grade, I can get away with getting a 70 on the final and still keep an A in the class or something, you know? So it was like just completely made up scenario.
Yeah.
Would I rather spend an extra hour studying for that class, even though I know it wouldn't make much of a difference? Or would I rather, you know, dedicate my efforts to writing an essay because, you know, it needs to get done for another class? Or more importantly, kind of chilling out, you know, being like, okay, like, it's probably better to get an extra hour of sleep the night before the exam than to cram. And that stems from like my working philosophy, like all-nighters, not worth it, probably worse for you in the long run than actually getting the sleep and calling calling it quits.
Yeah, there's also, that we talked about like our workaholics episode about, how it's good to take breaks, like it's better to work in like periods than to spend all your time, spend like multiple hours in a row working and then burn yourself out. And then the other thing I wanted to add on to that was that like ultimately that's another thing that boils down to uniqueness of perspective. Like
right.
basically the decision that you choose is because you perceive, like you weighed your options, you perceive the situation in a certain way. Somebody else might be like, hey, I think that this is the best route. Whereas
right.
like, again, the whole Robert
and it's
Frost
also
thing,
kind of comes down to values. Like ultimately, I value like my sleep. Some people maybe value getting that extra push because it'll give them the extra edge on the exam. Or like you could even talk about like the trolley car problem here. Some people value for those of you who don't know, I feel like, I mean, this is probably pretty common knowledge, but just as a quick recap, the trolley problem is like trolley car problem is one of those really famous philosophical dilemmas that have been done in so many different ways, but at the base of it, it's basically like you're in control of a trolley car, and the car can either go on two different tracks. On one track is 5 random people who are tied to the tracks. So if you go there, they're gonna die. You're gonna run over them. On the other track is like one single person who you care about. So basically, what do you do?
Yeah.
And there's so many different answers, so many different ways to analyze it, so many different variations on it over the year. The basics are like the utilitarian. And keep in mind, I know like nothing about philosophy, so this is just me quoting things that I've heard over the years and just like pulling crap out of my butt. But the utilitarian view is maximum happiness achieved, or maximum utility is always the proper route to take with any given decision. So the utilitarian view would be to kill the 1 as opposed to the 5, because ultimately those 5 people are more likely to generate more happiness throughout the span of the life that they gained, as opposed to the 1 person that you'd save. But like also granted, you'd be kind of bummed that someone who you really care about just bit the dust. There's also other views where like sort of like there are a lot of more modern philosophical discussions like this are more just like, because every life is sacred and every life is equal, it's more of like a coin toss. Pretty much it just comes down to a coin toss. But yeah, what were we talking about?
Like uniqueness of perspective.
Yeah.
And how like
so it comes down to values. If you value if you value keeping that person, if you value protecting the people who you care about, and like if other people get affected, so be it, then you're gonna go for the 5 people. Whereas if you're like like ultimately I would rather save more lives, then you're gonna go for you're gonna gank that poor unfortunate sod who was unlucky enough to
be on that track.
Be on that track. Once again, uniqueness and perspective stems from values. It stems from experience,
epigenetics,
and more importantly, sort of like how you were raised. Like we talked about this in my AP Gov class way back when, freshman year, but a large part of political socialization, and the process of sort of acquiring your views around politics and the world around you, a large part of that stems from
the home.
Yeah, and that's and I mean that's pretty obvious. Like, to be honest, there's like a meme. there was a meme in like the year we took that AP exam, because all the AP exams have bussin' memes. There's one, it's like when you see what causes political socialization in the question, it's like slamming the blue button, family.
Yeah.
But yeah, how you've been raised, all these various factors that we've been talking about. But I kind of wanted to get in, now that we're sort of on this philosophical, more like abstract, less
Scientific.
Yeah.
Point of view.
I kind of wanted to get in, like, are people built for different things? Like, there's obviously the big question, what is the meaning of life? But like for real, do different people have different purposes? Is there a grand design? Is there someone who sort of in charge of this whole thing, charting out each individual's path? When your cat dies and someone's like, oh, don't worry, like that's part of God's plan, and in the moment it really doesn't feel like any compassionate God would kill a cat just for their plan. But like, okay, that one might have been a little blasphemous, but what is there a plan? Are we here for different purposes and meanings?
Yeah. Do people have different roles, sort of?
Right, and a large part of the tradition that I grew up in, I come from a Tamil Brahmin family, so a large part of the sort of values and religious teachings that I learned when I was a kid were very Hindu and Hindu influenced. So, a big part of Hinduism is obviously like ideas like karma, like action, what do you do? And dharma, your duty, like what should you do? And there's this obviously one of the really influential, important texts of Hinduism, as I would like to say most people know, but frankly I don't know how many people know that much about Eastern religions and stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the most important texts in Hinduism is called the Bhagavad Gita, and the Gita is
I didn't know that.
Right. Well, the Gita is actually a much smaller part of this very large epic called the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is it's crazy. It's like this old school Sanskrit epic written by... It's complicated. The short answer is Vedavyasa with an asterisk. But it's something like 20 times longer. Maybe that's hyperbolic, but I think that's actually close to the real number. 20 times longer than Homer's Odyssey and Iliad combined.
Damn.
It's crazy. But this very small section in the middle, I could go through and give a brief summary of the Mahabharata, but that's not going to happen, partially because I don't even think we have the time for that.
Yeah.
And even if we did, I don't know how much of the details I remember. But the Gita is when basically there's these guys called the Pandavas, and they're like a band of brothers, and they're the good guys. And there's relatively few of them. There's Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva. So 5 brothers. I don't think I'm missing anyone. Whereas the other guys, the Kauravas, are the bad guys. But what happened was the Kauravas cheated the Pandavas out of their kingdom, and divine whateverness, the Pandavas are the good guys, and they're trying to take their kingdom back, and the Kauravas are kind of nah, that ain't gonna happen, chief. And the Kauravas amass this huge army, outnumber the Pandava army 10 to 1, over that. And Arjuna, who's one of the goated Pandavas, because he has this whole deal about being an archer, and he can shoot things without even he's cracked. But his charioteer is Lord Krishna, and Krishna is one of those very interesting figures in Hindu mythology. and partially because of that, he has such a massive following around the world today. And like the long and short of Krishna is he is a avatar of Vishnu, and Vishnu being one of the main Hindu gods. Every now and then he's like, hey, I gotta preserve this universe, but there's a lot of evil in there right now. So he kind of just skirts down, reincarnates as some being in this form. Once again, I could talk a lot about it, and I'm going off on a tangent, but I swear this is going somewhere. He can reincarnate in some form. Back in the early form, it sort of started as like, a fish to save people from the Great Flood. And the cool part about that is like the Great Flood is a common mythological motif throughout a bunch of different cultures. And there's a lot to unpack there, but obviously not going to get into it. Then there's like he turns into like a turtle. There's a whole story behind that, and like a boar, etc., etc., etc. And then he becomes Krishna. And the interesting thing about Krishna is he's one of the avatars during like the era of man, when like humanity is like out here doing our thing, chilling. You know how it is. And Krishna also has, I think by far he's one of the most like humanized of the avatars, because there's a lot of stories about his like childhood, and particularly that like he was kind of a menace, bro. Like high key, like
Black Air Force energy.
High key, bro. I'm not even capping. This man will be like rolling around his village, and all like the aunties are like, it's a small village, and they're all like shepherds and like local farmers and stuff, and they'd be making their curds and yogurt and butter or whatever, and this man would just break in and eat it, bro. He's a monster. And then they're like, all right, you know what, like we're gonna tie our butter to like the ceilings, there's no way this kid could reach it. And then this man, like a mini mob boss, organizes his whole gang of cronies, and like him and all the other local kids like build a human pyramid, and this man just climbs to the top, grabs the butter, like hits a lick and dips, bro. Like I'm telling you, this man was absolutely goated.
Yeah,
but like
stealing sauce packets.
Yeah, facts. But like as I was saying, like all these stories of Krishna really like humanize him and make him an empathizable sort of character, and a version of this god. I digress. I don't know how much of that is actually relevant, but it's pretty fun to learn. So anyway, Krishna is actually the charioteer of Arjuna, but I mean by this point he's pretty much grown up and like whatever. And Arjuna is like about to enter this war, like the battle for Kurukshetra, and he's in this chariot, and he's like telling his charioteer Krishna like, hey, I want to go survey the field, like go up to that hill over there, I want to like look out. And as he's looking out, he's like, that's like Bhishma, that was my teacher, like oh my god, that's my cousin, that's my uncle. Like he's going through all this, he's like, I can't kill these people, they're important to me, like I grew up with them, like I can't do that, it's wrong. And then Krishna, in like the most like based Chad possible moment, he's like, bro, you gotta do it, you gotta do your duty, and you gotta put your duty above all else. So even if that means murking your cousin, like ultimately you will be doing good karma and you will be rewarded for it. And I could get into a whole discussion about how that is very, like, was that intentional? Is that really like the word of God? Like, because so much of these stories have been filtered and distilled and altered and warped throughout history by human voices.
Yeah.
Was that, is doing good dharma, like, I feel like fundamentally that's at the core, that's a core concept and tenet of Hinduism. But, like, there's also the added, like, the way it was sort of implemented in society eventually became, like, justification for the caste system, or, like, sort of keeping people in their place. Or, there's There's even like an idea in sort of the Hindu philosophy that like as you grow, you as a man, once again the tradition is very largely patriarchal. So a lot of the voices emphasized are the voices of men and what men should do, which is, unfortunate, but a product of the times. And there's like this whole idea that, the whole goal, the ultimate idea for a lot of Eastern religions, not just Hinduism, but also Buddhism and Jainism, are ultimately detaching yourself from the cycle of rebirth, achieving liberation or moksha or nirvana or whatever you want to call it. And you would think like the only way to do that is just to like straight meditate, like clear your mind, elevate, hit that galaxy brain type beat after chilling on a mountain and never eating. But Hinduism, at least some texts, are very much like, no, part of your dharma as a man is to, like, once you get to a certain age, part of your duty is to start a family and provide for the family and do good for society. And only once you reach an old age where you're no longer like that socially used, basically after retirement, then you can sort of focus on detaching yourself from the attachments, because like suffering springs from attachment, etc., etc. And that's like such a wild concept to me, because like yes, it makes sense, but how much of it was someone writing in like, how do we maintain like our societal structure and keep our society productive? And it's really wild. But at the core, basically in summary, at the core of Hinduism is do your duty, no matter what the duty is and no matter what the cost is, and you will be rewarded for it. Like the idea is not just do your duty, but do your duty without thought of the potential reward or fruits that you're gonna get from it. And it's like very hard to do that, right? Because economically speaking, no independent actor would really do anything without incentive.
It's human. I guess it's human instinct. Like, we strive to survive and like self-preservation, basically. I guess really quick. So a question. So I guess it boils down to, does uniqueness of perspective come down to
our purpose, like what we were put here to do?
So like you were saying, our duty, or is it more so all the aspects
that we talked about in the first half.
So I don't know, it's really interesting. It's a lot to take in. I'm sorry.
It's cool. I spend a large portion of my time thinking, which is kind of sad.
Oh, I mean, but we have brains for a reason. So.
Yeah, that's true.
But
I think ultimately the answer is to pretty much everything in this world that's worth questioning is complicado. It's totally in the gray area. Yes, a lot of and going back to what we were saying earlier about sort of getting those values imbued in you, maybe as you were growing up, you grew up in a Hindu culture like me, so your idea of what you should be doing is largely influenced by ideas of dharma and karma. Whereas, other cultures certainly believe different things. Or like, enlightenment thought or like transcendentalist thought is just kind of like, chill, like freedom of speech, like separation of church and state, like all those things sort of touch upon like, how should a man lead his life? Or, like how should a man or woman or person, like I'm not trying to be but you get the point. So a large part of how people view themselves and their purpose is influenced by their self-perception, which is influenced by the values that they get growing up, or, their mental well-being. So yeah, it's complicated, and I always have a blast thinking about these sort of things and talking about them with people like you.
Yeah, and really quick, yeah, something really interesting. Like, I guess there's not really any answer to this question. It's nothing that you or I could answer. You know, I mean, I don't think it's anything anybody can answer. But it's like the idea that, like, you know, does basically, as you mentioned earlier, like, does our duty transcend like lifetimes, right? So like, my mother decided she wanted to be a doctor when she was 5 years old, and so like, she accomplished that dream, and it's like, you know, and sort of in my family, we talk about the idea of reincarnation. It's something that, you know, we believe in, and you know, we talk about, and so like, you know, one of the questions that, you know, something that you know, my mom has discussed with people, and, you know, with me, is like, do we have these roles in life, or not even in life, because I was saying, as like, you know, these things transcend lifetimes. Like, for example, in the case of my mother, she wanted to be a doctor when she was 5, and, you know, that's not something people really know. Like, the idea of like being like, I'm gonna be a doctor when you're 5, and actually like carrying that out, like, that's not something that happens very often. So like, the idea is like, for example, for my mother, is her role to be a healer? Like, is that her like duty, like, not only in this lifetime, but like in all lifetimes? Is that like something that, you know, she like just
Bro really got assigned to the healer class.
yeah, but is that something that, you know, she just gets reincarnated as? And then it raises the question, like, is that like we were saying, unique perspective, and I guess like, is that something that we are all sort of, I guess, bestowed, like a duty in life that, you know, we sort of find our way to fulfilling? And, you know, I feel like that differs for everybody. But
and I also feel like one belief that I held for a very long time, and I mean, for the still for the most part hold, is you meet every single person for a reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Or like,
the saying in my family is, people are in your life for a reason, for a season, or for a lifetime. It's one of the three.
Right.
And
right.
So,
yeah. I've never heard that before, but that's like, that's a good way of putting it. But, you know, like, I feel like a lot of the people I've met have taught me valuable lessons about life.
Yeah, for sure.
Some in good ways, some in not so good ways. And, you know, and even like people, like when I meet like and make new friends, like they're now in my life for that reason or season or a lifetime.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's sort of like partially, I not necessarily, I don't like think like it's part of the grand design, but I also think that, you know, maybe their purpose, at least in how it relates to me, is to teach me about something or to help me accomplish something, or, you know, like obviously I'm not trying to make it all about me or myself, but sure. I think that's also a large part of like, maybe the reason they're in my life is to introduce that needed perspective for sure. During that critical time, you know?
I was actually going to basically touch upon the same thing, that, you know, obviously we started this whole conversation with uniqueness of perspective and sort of how people see the world in different ways. And then we transitioned to the, you know, I guess the topic of like, does everybody have a duty? And I feel like, I feel like, you know, that partially that is true, that like, people come into your life, I feel like, for, you know, for a reason, for a season, or for a lifetime. You learn something from everybody you meet because of that uniqueness of perspective, because of how they see the world differently, because of the way they interact with you, because the two of you aren't the same entity. You guys are different, and so you're gonna find similarities, you're gonna find differences, and you're gonna learn from each other, and beyond that, you know, grow as people. And so, you know, what's that Shakespeare quote? Every man's a whatever, something. What's that?
Every man's a player on the stage.
There
like,
you go.
I want to say Macbeth, but honestly, I could be capping. No, it's not
Macbeth. It's one of his shorter works.
Right.
But yeah, it's something like, the world's a stage, like life's a stage, and all the men merely players on the stage. Right?
Life's a party, and I'm the piñata.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, hey, you can think of it that way too. But yeah, so essentially, like, you know, I feel like all of our unique perspectives and sort of the, I guess, duties that, you know, we may be interested in with, like, you know, that transcend our lifetimes. You know, we obviously don't have the answer to that question yet, but like, you know, I feel like they all play a role in the way we like interact with each other, and, live harmoniously. Maybe not so harmoniously, but I mean that's life on this planet. But yeah, I think that's
man. I think that's about our time. So
that's about our time.
In summary, it's complicated, bro.
But definitely
life is whack.
Yeah, but definitely, people definitely do have various unique perspectives and
if you're fortunate enough to have those unique people in your life, make sure to spread the love,
Yeah, for sure.
Always be good to the people around you. So, to wrap it all up, you've been listening to 101.1 FM, WBRULP, WFOOLP, WVVXLP, Providence.
Yeah, and, for those of you listening, we just wanted to say that this week we have established our website. It's www.theoutapocketpodcast.com. Once again, that is www.theoutapocketpodcast.com. That's OUTTA, pocketpodcast.com.
And if you have any thoughts about the show, anything you want to let us know, any, recommendations, any compliments, we also have on the website a contact us page where it shoots us a direct email. So,
Yep.
Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. We'll see you next week. And guys, bro, I don't know how I try to give some out-of-pocket advice at the end of every episode, but honestly, I'm coming up blank. We're 1/12 into the 525,600 minutes of this year. Let's keep going strong, guys.
Yeah. So catch you later, guys, and take care.